Hello everyone, welcome to GS Core. My name is Sourabh Mishra. So today in this session we are going to discuss questions related to environment, disaster management and science and technology which has come in OPSC OCS Mains 2022, right? So we'll take up one by one the questions related to these topics of environment, disaster management, science and tech, and we'll try to see that which all areas you need to address in these questions and how to structure your answers related to that, right? So let us start with the first question. Now the first question says, so they have framed an elaborate question here. So sometimes whenever we see that an elaborate question is there, that is you can say advantage for us. Why advantage? Because they have pinpointedly explained their expectation that you need to address each and every part which is given in the question, right? If the question is open-ended, that becomes a little difficult, that then you will have to decide that what will be your subhead, which all dimensions you need to address, right? But in these kind of question, they have explicitly mentioned that what their expectation are. We just need to cater to that in our subheads, right? So look at the question, assess the environmental and human health impact. So assess the environmental and human health impacts of plastic pollution. So your first subhead, so you will be starting your answer with an introduction. In the introduction, you talk about plastic pollution first. It would be better if you can quote a data related to plastic pollution that which indicates in the introduction itself that what is the magnitude of the problem, right? So in the introduction you can start with a factual information related to plastic pollution. Then the first subhead will be the environmental and human health impacts of plastic pollution. Second part, they are talking about examine the sources, distribution and persistence of plastic pollution in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. Discuss the potential strategies and technological innovation for mitigating plastic pollution and promoting sustainable waste management practices. So every aspect which is related to plastic pollution they have asked in this question. It is something you can say a short essay related to plastic pollution and their mitigation strategies, right? So in your answer, you will have to take subheads and address the question accordingly. So first, you will start with the plastic pollution which has emerged as a pressing environmental issue of our time with far-reaching consequences for terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem as well as human health. So in that way, if you do not have any data specific to plastic pollution, you can start with a generic introduction of the issue as well, right? Then talk about the sources of plastic pollution. Now see, sources we can segregate that as single-use plastic, microplastic, industrial processes, land-based activities, that how these are leading to as the basic sources of plastic pollution. But if you look at the environmental damage, so the core issue with plastic is that it is non-biodegradable, right? And the magnitude of its issue. So when we are addressing environmental and human health impact, so environmental impact is majorly because of the nature of non-biodegradable of plastics, right? So it persists in the environment for a longer period of time. So that is the major issue. So in the impact, you need to address this part as well. Fine. And the second aspect is the large scale usage. So from our day-to-day activities, if you see, plastic is used in a range or variety of areas, right? Why? Because it is low cost and easily manufactured, right? So that leads to, you can say, environmental impact, because the disposal of the plastic is not proper, so it remains in the landfills or in the soil for a longer period of time. So it leads to environmental pollution in that way. Human health impact, again when we are talking about microplastics, So microplastics has the ability to even enter the human body through our, you can say, circulatory system. It may have a dangerous impact on human health as well as impact on biodiversity as well. So those two aspects, impact on the environment and impact on the human health, you will have to address here. So second subhead would be the impact. One aspect is on the environment, other aspect is on the human health. Then comes the sources, distribution and persistence. Talk about the sources of plastic pollution. One would be the single use plastic, which is most harmful, and the large scale usage of single use plastic, that can be one source. Then you can talk about microplastics. Microplastics, the plastic beads in industries, and plastic deposition in land use. So these are the major sources you can talk about of the plastic pollution. Land-based activities basically incorporates the improper disposal of plastic waste, littering and inadequate waste management. So this leads to soil pollution as well, especially in the urban areas or in the coastal areas. Fine. Then distribution and persistence of plastic pollution. So they have asked about the terrestrial ecosystem, how plastic pollution can impact the terrestrial ecosystem. So plastic litter accumulated in the terrestrial environment such as parks, streets and landfills are the major cause of concern. Wind and water transport can carry plastic from these areas into rivers and oceans. So from there you can connect the aquatic ecosystem as well. Rivers serve as the you can say major medium through which the plastic is being transported from the inland towards the ocean. So rivers are the channels for that, right? So if from the land a terrestrial pollution, if the plastics are reaching to the rivers, that takes it to the oceans, and over the period of time that large plastic gets decomposed or disintegrated into the smaller particles which we call microplastic or microbeads. That large scale impact is on aquatic animals, right? So in aquatic ecosystem you can mention that part. And regarding the persistence, you need to talk about the plastics are highly durable and resistant to degradation. While some plastic breaks down into smaller fragments over a period of time, they persist in the environment for hundreds to thousands of years, right? Posing long-term threat to ecosystem and the wildlife. So that is the persistence nature of plastic pollutants in the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystem. Now from there, you need to talk about strategies for mitigating plastic pollution. Now what all areas we must work on. So here you can quote the plastic pollution rules and regulation of 2016 there, right? Where number one aspect is the policy intervention. Now governments can implement policies such as plastic ban, extended producer responsibility. So in our rules and regulations of plastic pollution 2016, there was a term related to EPR, extended producer responsibility. So this leads the onus of the plastic pollution on the producer, not on the consumer. So if a company is producing plastic products, so it is their inherent responsibility to take care of the proper disposal or recycling of the plastics, right? So policy intervention is something which you need to talk about in case of mitigating plastic pollution. Number one, strategies related to mitigating plastic pollution. Second, waste management infrastructure. A lot of investment is needed in recycling facilities, waste collection system and landfill management that helps prevent plastic leakage into environment and promotes circular economy principle. So waste management is very important, that it is collected properly and recycled properly, then we can reduce the impact. Third would be innovative technologies. Now, advanced recycling technologies such as chemical recycling and pyrolysis process can convert the plastic waste into valuable products, reducing the demand for a new plastics, right? So more and more investment which goes into the circular economy will lead to some kind of relief from the plastic pollution. So for that we need innovations for the mitigation plastic pollution, and needless to say that that requires a lot of investment. Fine. So the you can say urban local bodies whose primary responsibility is to deal with the waste management, so they need to invest more on segregating the plastic waste and recycling it for creation of new products. Fine. Then definitely we need to talk about community engagement, because in the life cycle of the plastic pollution, if you see, majority of the part lies on the consumer behavior as well. So that is why plastic ban, single use plastic ban has led to a lot of changes in the consumer behavior as well. So if the consumer is not you can say are aware for not using the plastic products, definitely the supply side also has to reduce its production. So both the things are correlated. So if you are curtailing or creating innovation in the supply side, which is the industries, at the same time you need to take care of the demand side as well, which is the consumer awareness. So that also becomes an important aspect, right? So by addressing all of these parts, then you will have to conclude. You can also quote international initiative of UNEP, where they are talking about the life cycle management of plastic to deal with the menace of plastic pollution, right? So when you are quoting national initiative as well as international initiatives, so your answer becomes more enriched, right? So make sure you are quoting that as well. Then you can conclude your answer by saying that for the present time, the plastic pollution has a lot of impact on the human society as well as the biodiversity. So we need a collective measure bringing together all the countries and their government towards achieving reduction in the plastic production and utilization, right? So in that note, you can conclude your answer here, right? Next question is related to ozone depletion. Okay. So question is, investigate the phenomena of ozone depletion in the stratosphere, right? First aspect. Second, discuss the role of ozone depleting substances, their sources and the environmental and health impacts of the depleted ozone layer. Evaluate international efforts and agreements aimed at addressing this issue. So they are focusing on ozone depletion in the stratosphere. What is ozone depletion in the stratosphere? So ozone we can find in our atmosphere in both the layers, troposphere as well as stratosphere. Now stratosphere ozone is good ozone and troposphere ozone is a bad ozone. Bad ozone as in it acts as a greenhouse gas in the troposphere, and it is being created through it is a secondary pollutant which is being created by combining the primary pollutants like nitrous oxide and in presence of sunlight, right? So that is the greenhouse gas, that is bad ozone. But in the stratosphere we have a ozone layer which is treated as good ozone because it restricts the UV rays. So for more depletion of that layers happens, so more the wildlife and the human beings will be exposed to UV rays. That may lead to different diseases, skin cancer, etc., right? So for us, preserving that ozone layer is very important. Now we need to explore that what all substances leads to the depletion of ozone layer, right? So you can start your answer here that ozone depletion in the stratosphere refers to the thinning of the ozone layer, particularly in the stratosphere, right? This phenomena is primarily attributed to the presence of ozone depleting substances, which they are asking here, ozone depleting substances in the atmosphere, which breaks down the ozone molecule through a chemical reaction, right? So here you need to first start your introduction about you can mention about good and bad ozone in atmosphere. Start your answer from here. Then explain the phenomena of ozone depletion. You can draw a diagram of the layers of the atmosphere and then indicate in the diagram that how that depletion is happening. Then talk about ozone depletion substances. What are their sources and their environmental and health impact because of the ozone depletion. So when we talk about the sources, so ozone depleting substances are basically human-made chemicals that contain chlorine, bromine or fluorine atoms, right? Now, which have the potential to react and destroy the ozone molecules. So that substances, that chemicals create free radicals. Now, free radicals in terms of chlorine, bromine, fluorine, and this interacts with the ozone and depletes the layer, chemical reaction, fine. Now, most significant ozone depleting substance is the chlorofluorocarbons, halones, carbon tetrachloride, methyl chloroform, etc. So you can take 4 or 5 examples of ozone depleting substances here, because that is being asked in the question. Now they are talking about the sources of it. Now from which source these ozone depleting substances are being released? So one of the important is industrial processes. Now the industries which utilize or which are involved in manufacturing of refrigerant, solvent, foam agents and fire extinguishers. So these 4 are the primary industries or primary processes which are involved in industries, that industries release these chemicals, right? Another would be agricultural application like methyl bromide, a potent ozone depleting substance, is used as a soil fumigant in agriculture to control pests and diseases. So as a pesticide also, if you are using ozone depleting substances, that will release the chemicals into the atmosphere, and the free radicals are going to interact with the ozone in the stratosphere and deplete the layer, fine. We have several consumer products also where ODS or the ozone depleting substances are found, like aerosol sprays, air conditioning system, insulation material, fire suppression system, etc. So industries, agriculture and consumer specific products, all of them in somehow releases ODS, ozone depleting substances. And as I told you that these substances contain chlorine, bromine and fluorine, which is in the atmosphere they create free radicals, and those free radicals again interacts with ozone to deplete the ozone layer. So that is the health, or that is the overall impact of these substances. Now if the ozone layer is thinning, so more and more UV rays are coming into the surface and directly exposing human beings as well as animals and wildlife to the exposure of UV rays, which is harmful for their health. That you need to explain. So environmental and health impact: increased UV radiation, presence of ozone to some extent leads to climate change as well, and overall insolation, if it increases because of the thinning of ozone layer, that will add to the heating of the atmosphere as well. So increasing UV radiation, direct health impact; climate change, indirect health impact; and ecosystem disruption. ecosystem disruption in a way. UV radiation affects marine phytoplanktons which form the base of marine food chain. Now, reduced ozone level can harm phytoplankton productivity in the oceans, which disrupt marine ecosystem and impact the biodiversity in the ocean. So, these are the environmental and health impact of thinning of ozone layer. Now, when we talk about the international efforts or agreements to address this issue, one of the major you can say agreement is the Montreal Protocol. So here you need to mention, okay, in the structure, ODS, sources plus impact, 4 sources we have seen and 3 major impacts. Then in agreements, talk about Montreal Protocol, that how Montreal Protocol is an international treaty aimed at phasing out the production and consumption of ODS, ozone depleting substances. It has been hailed as one of the most successful environmental agreements with almost universal ratification and significant reduction in the ODS emission. You can also talk about subsequent amendments which has happened in the Montreal Protocol, indicating that how an international agreement can lead to reduction of ozone depleting substances and eventually improving the condition of ozone layer in the stratosphere. So that is one of the case studies also, that if collectively all the countries are agreeing upon doing something, that can be achieved and we can revert the impact of the issue as well, right? So Montreal Protocol is one of the major example of that. After explaining about this agreement, you can conclude regarding the alternates which has been found for the ozone depleting substances in the industries, which has directly reduced the impact on ozone layer. Fine. On that note, you can conclude your answer there. Next question is related to climate change and greenhouse gases. So discuss the role of greenhouse gases in climate change. Number 1, explain the sources of major greenhouse gases, their atmospheric behavior and the mechanisms by which they contribute to global warming. Also outline potential strategies to mitigate the impact of greenhouse gases, right? So everything related to climate change and greenhouse gas they have asked here. How to start this answer? First, you talk about what you can say a greenhouse means, right? So your introduction should explain what do we mean by a greenhouse and what is its advantages. In agriculture, in the colder region, we use a green glass house which is built for trapping the heat, so that the species or the plants which are being grown there needs optimum level of temperature which is being created in the greenhouse, right? Same concept applies to at a large scale to our atmosphere as well, that the gases which are there, which has ability to trap heat, creates a large greenhouse for the earth, where the insolation is coming in but the terrestrial radiation is not going out fully, so it traps a layer of heat surrounding the planet, which is very essential for sustaining life on the planet. So that is the advantage of these gases in the atmosphere. But when the level of greenhouse gases increases in the atmosphere, so it traps more heat. Now that more heat is problematic, which is leading to a situation like climate change. So you will have to give you can say explain the concept of advantages and both disadvantages both here, right? Excess level of greenhouse gases is problematic. but for sustenance of life, we require these gases in our atmosphere because it traps heat and helps in the sustaining of life, right? So after talking about that, you need to mention major greenhouse gases and their sources. So what are the commonly known greenhouse gases? Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases like sulfur hexafluoride, perfluorocarbon, hydrofluorocarbons, etc., and water vapor. Water vapor is very important because that is also a gas which traps heat, and the unique factor about water vapor is that it captures the insolation, incoming heat, as well as the radiation. So both the aspect it captures, so it is a very potent greenhouse gas which captures a lot of, you can say, heat. So these carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases and water vapor are the examples of greenhouse gases which you can take, and subsequently talk about their sources. For example, carbon dioxide, it is generated primarily from the burning of fossil fuel like coal, oil and natural gases, deforestation, land use changes, etc. Methane produced by livestock digestion, rice cultivation, landfills, coal mining and natural gas production. Nitrous oxide emitted from agricultural practices such as fertilizer use, animal manure, industrial processes and combustion of fossil fuel. Fluorinated gases, which includes hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbon, sulfur hexafluoride and nitrogen trifluoride. These are used in refrigeration, air conditioning, electronics and other industrial application. So mention about the name of the gases and their sources from where they are getting released, right? Now when we talk about the atmospheric behavior, so both positive and negative you will have to mention. Optimum percentage of the gases helps in sustaining life, but the increased level of presence of these gases leads to trapping of heat, which increases the overall temperature of the planet and eventually leads to situations like climate change. So mechanism of which contribute to global warming basically leads to you can say overall temperature rise, which leads to melting of ice, sea level rise, ocean acidification. So these are the consequences which happens because of high level of global temperature. Now there are a lot of mitigation strategies on which we can talk about reduction of greenhouse gases. So first is the transition towards renewable energy. Now if we analyze, most of the greenhouse gases are being emitted because of the usage of fossil fuel as energy source. So first mitigation strategy would be to look for energy transition. Now energy transition from the fossil fuel sources to non-fossil fuel sources like solar energy, wind energy, small hydropower energy, nuclear energy, etc., which are greener in nature. So first aspect, energy transition. Second aspect, energy efficiency, that we need to invest in our systems in such a way that with less energy consumption we must take maximum output of it, which will allow us to reduce our energy consumption. That is also a way through which you can reduce the impact of greenhouse gases, right? Needless to say, afforestation and reforestation is very important because that captures more carbon dioxide. So it acts as a carbon sink, right? Sustainable agricultural practices. Sustainable agricultural practices where we are, you can say, focusing on crop rotation, organic farming, which reduces the emission of methane and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, which is basically coming from the fertilizers and pesticides which we are using in the unsustainable form of agriculture. So we need to move from unsustainable to sustainable agricultural practices. So these will actually reduce your greenhouse gases, right? But when we talk about you can say international agreements, so the problem of greenhouse gas is not particularly for one country. It is a collective responsibility, right? So there comes, as a mitigation strategy, we can talk about carbon trading, right? There you can quote the Kyoto Protocol and its related mechanisms like joint implementation, carbon trading, and common development mechanism. So these are the mechanisms which are given within the Kyoto Protocol, where 2 or 3 more countries can involve in investing in projects which are sustainable in nature and more greener in nature, right? So apart from the primary mitigation strategies, the strategies like carbon trading can also help in overall reduction of greenhouse gases that you need to mention here. Fine. So first talk about what greenhouse means, then in our atmospheric context what greenhouse effect means, then what are the gases which are responsible for greenhouse effect, talk about them and their sources, how they are trapping more heat and it is leading to climate change situation, and because of climate change situation what kind of erratic environmental scenario we are seeing, like erratic rainfall, more severe cyclones, melting of ice, rising of sea level, ocean acidification, etc. Those things also you need to mention. Then you talk about the mitigation strategies, focusing on the energy transition, energy efficiency, afforestation, reforestation, sustainable agriculture practices, then carbon trading, etc. Quote Kyoto Protocol here as well. Fine. And definitely if you want to add up to the national initiative, you can talk about the Panchamrit targets which we have taken, 5 targets to be achieved by 2050 and our target of becoming net zero by 2070. That is also, you can say, government intention towards reducing greenhouse gases and reducing climate change. Fine. So with quoting these things, you can conclude your answer of this question. Fine. Now this question, they are talking about Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Environment Protection Act of 1986 is an umbrella, you can say, legislation for the preservation and conservation of environment. Now they are asking you to analyze the effectiveness of this act, because they are saying Environmental Protection Act 1986 has now turned into a toothless tiger. Comment. So the keyword they are given here is comment on that, whether you agree with this or not, right? Now to address this kind of question, first you need to explain about the EPA 1986, a background of it. It came as, you can say, a reaction of Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984, which indicated that we require a umbrella legislation to, you can say, control industries and safety related to the environment, right? So Environment Protection Act came in 1986 after the Bhopal gas tragedy. Now before that also we had legislations like Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, Air Act, Water Act, Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So, but we did not have any, you can say, umbrella legislation which takes care of the environment in holistic manner, right? So for that reason, EPA 1986 has importance. Now, it was a landmark legislation, but however, over the period of time, we have seen that the EPA has faced criticism for its effectiveness in achieving its objectives, leading to the perception that it has become a toothless tiger, right? So you can start your answer with this statement. Then you can identify in which all areas there is a lack of you can say implementation or issues. So first is the weak enforcement. Now, one of the primary criticism of EPA is lack of effective enforcement mechanism. Now, despite having provisions of penalty and punishment for the environmental violations, enforcement agencies often lack the resources, capacity and political will to enforce the law rigorously. So first is weak enforcement, which is making it a toothless tiger. Second, inadequate implementation. While the EPA lays down comprehensive regulations for various aspects of environmental protection, including air, water pollution control, hazardous waste management, environmental impact assessment, implementation often falls short. Now, many industries continue to operate without obtaining necessary environmental clearance or complying with the pollution control norms, leading to environmental degradation. So, although it has rules and regulation, you can take example of environmental impact assessment, EIA, that all the provisions are there for the any industries which is going to be established. We require environmental clearance, and for that we have environmental impact assessment, but a lot of loopholes has been found, and the rules has been flouted by a lot of companies and industries, which is eventually leading to the environmental degradation. So inadequate implementation is the second aspect. Third, corruption and regulatory capture. Now, corruption and regulatory capture further undermines the effectiveness of EPA. Industries may engage in corrupt practices to bypass the environmental regulation to influence regulatory agencies to overlook the violation. This collusion between regulator and polluter undermines the integrity of environmental clearance, right? So third aspect is corruption and the regulatory capture. Regulatory capture means what? The nexus between the regulating authority with the industries. So that undermines the overall implementation of EPA. Lack of public participation is the next point, where EPA emphasizes the importance of public participation in environmental decision making process. However, in practice, public involvement is often limited, and affected communities may not have adequate opportunity to voice their concern to hold polluters accountable. So this act requires public participation, but there are very less mechanisms and awareness among the public to intervene and raise their voices against the polluters, right? Generally, we see the NGOs which are working towards the conservation of environment, or the direct communities who are involved or who are being affected by the projects. Their contribution or their you can say involvement is seen, but we do not see a large scale public participation, majorly because of lack of awareness, and second, the adequate mechanism to incorporate public participation, that is also an issue here, right? Inadequate penalties. Now, the penalties prescribed under EPA for environmental violations are often seen inadequate deterrent. A lot of industries, they overlook these penalties, that by looking at the advantages they are gaining from the natural resource exploitation, on the if they compare that with the penalties which they have to pay, that is very less. So it does not act as a deterrent for large corporations. That is another issue which is making them toothless tiger. Then comes complex regulatory framework. Now, EPA's regulatory framework is often criticized for being complex and fragmented, with overlapping jurisdiction and responsibilities among different government agencies. This complexity also leads to confusion and inefficiencies. That is another issue. Limited scope and coverage. Although we are talking about the umbrella nature of this legislation, but despite amendments and revisions over the years, EPA may still have gaps in the coverage, particularly concerning emerging environmental challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, from new sources like electronic waste, plastic pollution, etc. So the sources of pollution and environmental degradation is changing over the period of time, but accordingly the EPA and their provisions are not changing. So that is another reason which makes it a toothless tiger. So here you will have to give reasons why you think that the provisions of EPA or the EPA legislation is you can say becoming a toothless tiger, that the provisions are there but they are not being implemented properly. That is the core idea and core demand of this question. You need to address accordingly in this particular question. Right? Next question is, explain biodiversity with respect to its types. Explain biodiversity with respect to its types at all biological levels. Discuss different patterns of biodiversity. Very specific question they are asking, that you talk about the biodiversity with respect to its types and patterns. So biodiversity refers to the variety of life on the earth, encompassing all living organisms from microorganisms to plants, animals, ecosystem, etc. Everything comes under the ambit of biodiversity. There are various types of biodiversity like genetic biodiversity, species biodiversity, and ecosystem biodiversity. Genetic biodiversity means diversity of genes within and among the population of species. So first type is genetic biodiversity, second type is species biodiversity, third is ecosystem biodiversity. Now if you look at here, genetic biodiversity is within a species, species 1. Here in the individuals which are there in this species, take example, suppose human beings. So every human being is different in their genetic construct. If you talk about tiger, so within tiger the population, every individual is different in their genetic construct. Now this genetic diversity helps in the population stability. Population stability, because more heterogeneous the species is according to their genetic construct, more stable the population will be, because the population is equipped to handle any kind of genetic disease or any kind of other diseases, right? If there is more homogeneity in the population, the entire population is under threat of extinction, right? So for that reason genetic biodiversity is important. Keep in mind that it is within the species. Species biodiversity is interspecies. Interspecies. Now species biodiversity refers to variety of species present in a particular area or an ecosystem. So in a particular ecosystem, how many types of species are there? More and more types of species in an ecosystem will indicate stability of the ecosystem. Stability of ecosystem. So if a particular ecosystem has 10 species and another ecosystem has 100 species, so definitely the ecosystem with 100 species will be more stable in nature. You can take example of, you can say tropical rainforest has a lot of species, or equatorial rainforest has a lot of species in that. So that is much more stable ecosystem than a desert ecosystem where the species, number of species are less. Getting my point? Third type is ecosystem biodiversity. It is known as ecological biodiversity, refers to the diversity of ecosystem within a region or across the planet. So at a level of biosphere, if we talk about, more number of ecosystems provides more stability. So these are the three basic types of biodiversity at biological level. You will have to explain these three with examples to indicate various types of biodiversity after explaining what biodiversity means in the introduction itself, right? Next, they are in the second part, they are talking about discuss different patterns of biodiversity. Now the patterns, there can be various patterns, like you can say latitudinal gradient. Now based on the latitude from the 0 degree towards the poles, if you move, so the pattern says that increase in the latitude will lead to decrease in the biodiversity variation, right? So you will find more biodiversity in the equatorial region and less biodiversity in the polar region, and gradually with increase in the latitude the diversity of biodiversity comes down. So that is latitudinal gradient. Again, another would be species area relationship. Now the species area relationship describes the relationship between the size of an area and the number of species it can support, ecological carrying capacity of an area. That also indicates that how many types of you can say biodiversity will be sustained in that particular area. That is another pattern. Elevation gradient. So if you increase, if you go you can say increase the height, so with increase in the height the number of species reduces. So you can take example of a hilly region or a mountain ecosystem. So at the base of the mountain the species variation is very high. More and more you go towards the top of the mountain, the species variation reduces. That is another pattern of biodiversity according to the elevation, right? Then there is disturbances and succession. That disturbances events such as wildfires, hurricanes, human activities can influence the pattern of biodiversity by creating opportunity for species to colonize a region or leave a region. So even the biodiversity pattern is dependent on natural calamities and human intervention. So secondary succession, you can take example that because of natural calamity, if an area is wiped out or the from the wildlife, now that takes another again time to rejuvenate the prior complexity. So that is the secondary succession. That is also a biodiversity pattern. So in the second part you need to mention about various patterns in the biodiversity which we see. That is the exact demand of this question, that first you mention about the types of biodiversity, second you mention about the pattern of biodiversity. Clear? Now next question is related to flood. So we can map this to the disaster management. Question is, what is flood? Number one, what are flood forecasting and warning systems? Give the detail of warning about landslide hazard and geological survey of India. Okay. So in disaster management they have asked this one question that is related to the flood. So first you define what flood means. You can say sudden release of water from a natural source or a man-made source which creates a hazardous situation for the local biodiversity or the human beings living in there. So that amounts to flood. Now there are natural causes of it, there are anthropogenic causes of flood as well. So you will have to talk about both natural causes, anthropogenic causes. Anthropogenic causes. Here what kind of example you can take in anthropogenic causes? Suppose dam failure. Dam failure can be taken as an example of anthropogenic causes. Here you can talk about management of old dams through drip initiative. Drip initiative, which is in collaboration with the World Bank. So dam rehabilitation and improvement program. So you can talk about that here. So after explaining what flood and the examples and the types of flood, then they are asking you to talk about the forecasting and warning system. Now forecasting and warning system is in any disaster management life cycle. If the disaster happens here, so one part is the immediate response in terms of providing relief to the victims, right? Then you talk about the rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a little bit, you can say a little bit long term, not exact immediate response. Then we talk about capacity system or capacity building. So that the society is ready for the next disaster, next flood to happen, right? So in capacity building, it is important that you invest in flood forecasting and warning system. So they are asking you this question related to capacity building of the disaster, which is the flood, right? Now here, in terms of flood forecasting warning system, you can talk about hydrometeorological monitoring, which includes monitoring of the rainfall, river flow, water levels, weather condition, which is essential for assessing the flood risk in the area. This data is collected through the network of gauges, radar, satellite and weather station. So this large scale data can be accumulated and a flood forecasting can be done, that whether one area is more vulnerable of occurrence of the flood or not, right? So hydrometeorological monitoring is one aspect of flood forecasting. Data analysis and modeling. Now data collected from the monitoring station is analyzed using meteorological models to forecast the potential flood events. These models take into account factors such as rainfall intensity, soil moisture, topography, river basin characteristics, etc. So this is another aspect. One is the monitoring, hydrometeorological monitoring. Second is the data analysis and the models which are used to analyze and present the data, right? So these two aspects. Then early warning system. Now once the potential flood events are identified, early warning systems are activated to disseminate information to the public and authority. So if the system, the monitoring system has found an outcome that flood can happen, then dissemination of information is the another aspect, which is providing the early warning system to the public as well as the authorities. Then becomes one of the capacity building thing is the community preparedness, that the community education and preparedness is also required in the flood prone areas, that how to react immediately if any information of flood is coming, right? So what should be the first course of action, how we can you can say remove the population from the flood prone areas to the other areas by getting the early warning information, right? So this can happen with other disasters as well, like landslides. Generally landslides and earthquake are the immediate events, but there the role of community preparedness is also there. So this is one of the major capacity building exercise when we talk about the disaster management, right? So here you need to quote about Disaster Management Act of 2005 and how capacity building activities and the early warning system need to be required in the act. So you need to quote Disaster Management Act of 2005 as well. Also you can mention about the Sendai framework which is there for disaster management. So national level Disaster Management Act of 2005 and international level Sendai framework you need to quote in any answer which you are writing for disaster management. Fine. Then the next part of the question talks about warning about landslide hazards. Now, landslides are another natural hazard that can be triggered by heavy rainfall, earthquake, or human activities like floods. Landslide can cause significant damage damage to the economic resources as well as the human life. Now, warning system for landslide hazards typically involve the following components like landslides hazard mapping, identifying areas which are prone to landslide through geological surveys, and mapping is the first step in assessing the landslide risk. There comes the role of Geological Survey of India. Okay. Next, monitoring and early warning. Monitoring of ground movement, soil moisture, and rainfall is essential for detecting potential landslide triggers. An early warning system may be involved installing sensors and geoclinical, you can say, instruments in landslide prone areas to detect movement and trigger the alarm, right? Another aspect of public awareness and education is there, and emergency response and preparedness is also one of the aspects which the disaster management force, they take care of that when any large scale landslide happens. You need to mention about the Geological Survey of India, because they have mentioned that also, that how Geological Survey of India and their mapping methods can be utilized for the early warning system and the forecasting. So their key functions of Geological Survey of India is geological mapping, geological investigation, early warning system, capacity building, etc. Right? So this is the core demand of this particular question from disaster management. One question is there from the science and tech, which is talking about the telemedicines and describe its purpose and application. Purpose and application of what? Telemedicine. Why they have asked this question? That after COVID we have seen the large scale utilization of remote diagnosis and treatment. Because of the lockdown, a lot of people, their movement was restricted, so they were dependent on the telemedicine support through you can say remote diagnosis and treatment of patient using telecommunication technology such as video conferencing, mobile apps, remote monitoring devices, etc. It enables healthcare professionals to provide medical services to patients who are geographically distant, thereby overcoming the barriers to access and improving healthcare delivery. So core idea of telemedicine is to overcome geographical barrier in providing healthcare facilities. Now, there can be many methods through which we can utilize this idea of telemedicine. So, the purpose of telemedicine is to basically provide the overcoming the geographical, temporal, and logistical barriers in improving the access to healthcare to the citizens. It allows patients to consult with healthcare providers remotely, eliminating the need for travel and reducing waiting times. Now, telemedicine also enables healthcare professionals to collaborate and consult with specialists in the real time, facilitating timely diagnosis and treatment. Additionally, telemedicine enhances continuity of care by enabling follow-up consultations and monitoring of patients' health status remotely, right? So, this is the purpose of telemedicine, and its application can be seen is in remote consultation, telemonitoring, telepsychiatry, teledermatology, tele-stroke services, remote patient monitoring, teleconsultation, and collaboration. So, in various areas of the healthcare facilities, we can utilize this aspect of telemedicine. So, it has diverse range of application in the healthcare system, but the core purpose is to overcome geographical, technological, or you can say logistical barriers of the movement of patients from hospital to hospital. Even the collaboration between the doctors becomes also easy at the by using the ICT technologies. You can get the healthcare services. So the idea here is utilization of ICT in healthcare. Healthcare service delivery. Now, ICT can be utilized in various other aspects also. ICT means you can say internet communication and technology. So it can be utilized in so many aspects. Telemedicine is one of the example of healthcare service delivery where we are incorporating the telecommunication technology, right? Because now by looking at the digital penetration in our country, it has become much more easier for the doctors to diagnose diseases to the remotest part of the country with the communication channels which we have established. So it is nothing but, this question is nothing but the application of ICT. Application of ICT specifically for healthcare service delivery. The mode of delivery is telemedicine, right? So in this way you need to frame your answer where you are understanding from where this question is being framed, why this question is being framed. ICT is there in your syllabus and ICT's application is there in your syllabus. Specific application in healthcare service delivery they are asking. The mode is telemedicine. Then you need to talk about what it is, what are its purposes, what are its application. Very straightforward direct question they have asked from the science and technology and its application in your day-to-day life, right? So I hope this discussion helps you in understanding the questions related to environment, disaster management and science and tech, and how to approach these questions in the examination, right? So thank you so much for listening to this discussion.